Who do you think has the power to hurt you the most? A friend? A stranger? No. The deepest wounds come from the people who were supposed to love you. Your own family. What happens when the people you trusted the most decide you no longer belong? When they cast you out like you never mattered? Welcome to AGS Stories, where true stories of betrayal, resilience, and justice come to life. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And let's dive into today's powerful story. I never expected my own family to turn on me so completely. Sure, I knew I was never the favorite. That role belonged to my sister, Lauren, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. But I never thought they'd actually push me out like I was a stranger, like I was nothing. It happened on an ordinary evening over dinner. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic filled the air, a meal my mother had made 1,000 times before. I was sitting at the table, sipping my water, when my sister leaned forward, that ever-present smug look on her face. "You don't belong in this family," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. I felt the words before I truly heard them. A slow, creeping chill ran down my spine. I looked at her, then at my mother, waiting for the inevitable sigh, the usual, "Lauren, stop it." But it never came. Instead, my mother took a slow sip of her tea, barely glancing at me. "She's right," she said, as if she were commenting on the weather. My father didn't even bother to look up from his phone. "Yeah, maybe it's better this way," he muttered. I froze. For a moment, I thought I had misheard them. This had to be a joke, some twisted prank where they'd all burst out laughing any second now, saying gotcha. But as I looked into my sister's eyes, cold, triumphant, I realized this was real. The three of them had planned this. Lauren had finally convinced them. She had always been good at that, getting people to see things her way, twisting reality until she was the victim and I was the problem. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Wow," I said quietly, my voice steady even as my hands trembled under the table. "You actually did it." Lauren's grin widened, like a cat who had just cornered a mouse. I turned to my mother. "You're really okay with this?" She shrugged. "You've always been different. Maybe this is for the best." Different. That word. The word they had used my entire life. Never good enough, never quite right. Not like Lauren, who fit their mold so perfectly. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Well, I guess I'll save you the trouble." I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor. I grabbed my jacket off the back of the chair, my fingers gripping the fabric so tightly my knuckles turned white. I waited just for a second. "Wait. Stop. Come back." But the words never came. Lauren was practically glowing with satisfaction. My mother turned back to her tea. My father kept scrolling through his phone. I swallowed hard. I turned, walked to the front door, and stepped out. The cold night air hit me like a slap, sharp and unforgiving. I sucked in a breath and let the door close behind me. That was it. No goodbye. No second thoughts. I stood on the front porch, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. I had just lost my family. But the strangest part? It didn't hurt the way they probably wanted it to. Because deep down, I realized maybe I had never really belonged. I walked away from the house that had never felt like home, my footsteps slow, deliberate. The crisp evening air wrapped around me, whispering the one undeniable truth. I was free. No more backhanded comments from my mother, no more cold indifference from my father, no more manipulative games from Lauren. I should have felt devastated, but instead, a strange sense of relief settled over me. It was like I had been holding my breath for years, and now, finally, I could exhale. I made my way to Olivia's apartment, my only true safe haven. When she opened the door, she took one look at my face and knew. "They actually did it," I said, stepping inside. "They threw me out," she sighed, shaking her head as she closed the door behind me. I can't say I'm surprised. She disappeared into the kitchen, returning with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "Honestly, you're better off. Your family is toxic, and we both know it." I let out a short laugh, sinking on her couch as she poured me a generous glass. "Yeah," I muttered, swirling the wine. "But it still stings, you know." She sat beside me, clinking her glass against mine. "Of course it does. They're your family. But let's be real. Have they ever treated you like you mattered?" I stared at the deep red liquid in my glass, watching as it swirled, mirroring the storm in my chest. No, they hadn't. Lauren had always been the priority. The golden child, the star, the one who could do no wrong. She could lie, manipulate, and twist every situation to her advantage. And my parents would nod along, excusing her every action. I had always been the outsider in my own family. And now, they had made it official. Olivia leaned back, propping her feet up on the coffee table. So, what now? You're free, babe. No more walking on eggshells. No more trying to win their approval. What's your next move? I took a sip of my wine, letting the warmth spread through me. I don't know, I admitted. I guess I'll figure it out. And that night, for the first time in years, I slept without the weight of their expectations crushing me. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. Olivia had already left for work, so I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, staring out at the city. For the first time in my life, I could do whatever I wanted. No guilt, no judgment, just me. But as I sat there, sipping my coffee, a thought nagged at me. Lauren had been pushing for this for months. The little comments, the not-so-subtle digs, the way she had been turning my parents against me. She hadn't just wanted to be the favorite. She had wanted me gone. But why? What was she so desperate to get rid of me for? And then I saw it, the suitcases by the front door. They had been planning a trip, a family vacation, without me. I let out a breathless laugh, shaking my head. Of course, it wasn't enough to cast me out. She wanted me erased completely. I wonder, do you think I should have done something to get back at them? Comment 111 if you think I should have made them regret it. Or comment 222 if you think I should have walked away and never looked back. But as much as I wanted to put it behind me, something told me this wasn't over. Not yet. 2 days passed in blissful silence. For the first time in years, I had no one criticizing my every move, no passive-aggressive comments from my mother, no smug grins from my sister, and no cold indifference from my father. I had the house to myself, and it was peaceful. The first night, I danced around the kitchen in my pajamas, blasting music as loud as I wanted. I made popcorn and binged my favorite TV shows, the ones my mother used to roll her eyes at. I slept in late, wrapped in the comfort of knowing that no one was there to remind me that I was different from them. The second day, I woke up feeling lighter than I ever had before. I made a big breakfast, humming to myself as I flipped pancakes on the stove. For once, I wasn't trying to tiptoe around someone else's expectations. And then my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, barely interested, until I saw the name flashing on the screen. Lauren. I rolled my eyes. Not today, Satan. I silenced the call and turned back to my pancakes. Then it buzzed again, and again. I sighed, flipping the last pancake onto the plate before checking my screen. 15 missed calls. 15. Curiosity won. I swiped to answer, my voice dripping with irritation. What? Finally, she shrieked, her voice frantic. We were robbed. We have no money. We're stranded. I leaned against the counter, letting out a slow, satisfied breath. I should have felt something, concern, maybe, sympathy, but instead, a smirk tugged at the corner of my lips. Didn't you say I wasn't part of this family? I mused. Looks like I'm still not. And then I hung up. For a few blissful seconds, I enjoyed the silence. I imagined Lauren standing in some overpriced resort, her face twisted in frustration as she realized her golden status wasn't going to save her this time. Then my phone started buzzing again. This time it wasn't just Lauren. It was my mother, my father, even Mike, Lauren's husband. I set my phone down on the counter, watching as the notifications kept rolling in. Texts, voicemails, desperate pleas. I could hear my mother's voice in my head. Family helps each other, no matter what. Funny how that only seemed to apply when they needed something. I took my plate of pancakes to the couch, turning on the TV as my phone continued its symphony of desperation. I had a choice to make. I could answer, listen to whatever sob story they had, and help them. I could be the bigger person, the one who always bent over backward for people who never lifted a finger for me. Or I could do nothing. I could let them suffer the way they had made me suffer. I could let them see what it felt like to be abandoned. What do you think? Should I have ignored them, and let them face the consequences of their actions? If you agree with that, comment 111. But if you think I should have answered and done something else, tell me your thoughts in the comments. Because trust me, this story is far from over. I sat in the coffee shop, stirring my latte absent-mindedly, my mind still buzzing from the chaos of the last few days. The desperate calls, the frantic texts, the voicemail from my mother that had tried to guilt-trip me into helping. We're family. We need you. Family. What a joke. I had ignored them all, and I had enjoyed it. Now, across from me, Mike sat hunched over, his fingers tapping against the table, his face pale and tense. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. I took a slow sip of my coffee. You said you needed to talk. So talk. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the cafe as if someone might be listening. Then he pulled out a folder from his bag and slid it across the table. She lied, he said, his voice low and urgent. I let out a dry chuckle, shaking my head. Mike, tell me something I don't know. No, he said, pressing the folder toward me. I mean about everything. I opened the folder and scanned the first few pages. Bank statements, text messages, screenshots of transactions. My fingers tightened around the paper as realization sank in. The robbery, he said, his voice strained. It wasn't real. She planned it. She gave the guy the money herself. I froze. This was next level insane, even for Lauren. I looked up at him, my pulse pounding in my ears. What the hell are you talking about? Mike leaned forward, lowering his voice even more. She's been draining my accounts, slowly, for months. And when I started noticing, she panicked. She needed a distraction, so she staged a robbery, made sure all the money was stolen so she wouldn't have to explain where it actually went. I clenched my fists. And the police report against me? He nodded grimly. That was part of the plan, too. She figured if you were under investigation, no one would be looking too closely at her. I should have known. I should have known. The way she had pushed so hard to get me out, how she had turned my parents against me so effortlessly. It wasn't just about winning their love. It was about covering her own tracks. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling sharply. Wow, she really doesn't miss a beat, does she? Mike looked down at his hands. I don't know what to do. I can't trust her. I can't go to your parents. They'll just take her side. You're the only one who sees her for what she really is. I let out a humorless laugh. Yeah, well, seeing it and stopping it are two different things. For a moment, we sat in silence. I flipped through the folder again, my brain spinning with possibilities. Then, an idea formed. What if, I said slowly, tapping the papers, we don't just stop her. What if we make sure she pays for it? Mike's eyes flickered with hesitation. What do you mean? I smirked, the first real smile I had felt in days. Lauren loves control, right? She manipulates, she schemes, she plays everyone like puppets. But what happens when she's the one being played? Mike exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. I mean, if she finds out we're working against her. She won't, I interrupted. Not until it's too late. I glanced back down at the evidence in front of me. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was justice. She had framed me, stolen from her husband, lied to our parents, staged a fake robbery. It was time she faced the consequences of her own actions. What do you think? Do you think she deserved everything that was coming to her? Or maybe even more? Comment 111 if you think she got exactly what she deserved, or if you have another way you'd like to see her pay for what she did. Let me know in the comments. Because trust me, this was just the beginning. I had always imagined this moment, standing in front of my family, finally exposing Lauren for the fraud she was. But in my mind, it had played out differently. Maybe I had expected my parents to realize the truth on their own, to finally see what I had seen all along. Maybe I had hoped, deep down, that they would look at me and say, "We were wrong. We should have believed you." But I knew better now. So instead of waiting for them to figure it out, I had brought the truth to them, and I was about to make sure they couldn't ignore it. Mike and I walked into my parents' house unannounced, my heart pounding as I gripped the folder in my hands. It was packed with every piece of evidence he had gathered: bank statements, fake transactions, messages Lauren had sent to the guy she had paid to rob them. My mother looked up from the couch, startled. "What are you doing here?" I ignored her and stepped further into the room, my gaze locking onto my sister, who was seated on the love seat with a glass of wine in hand. Lauren's face twisted in irritation. You have got to be kidding me. I dropped the folder onto the coffee table with a loud thud. Explain this? She didn't move at first. Then, slowly, she placed her glass down and reached for the papers. Her expression didn't shift as she skimmed the first page, but when she flipped to the next one, the color drained from her face. Mom leaned over, her brows furrowing. What is this? I crossed my arms. Evidence? Lauren swallowed hard and forced a laugh. Oh, please. This is ridiculous. What kind of stunt are you trying to pull now? Dad, who had been silent up until now, reached for the documents and started reading. His face darkened with every passing second. You've got to be joking, he muttered, flipping through the pages faster now. Tell me this isn't true, Lauren. Lauren sat up straighter, her breath coming quicker. Dad, it's not what it looks like, okay? Not what it looks like. I repeated, my voice cold. It looks like you faked a robbery. It looks like you stole thousands from your own husband. And it definitely looks like you framed me for something I didn't do. Mom gasped, covering her mouth. Lauren slammed her hands onto the table. I was desperate, she shrieked, tears suddenly spilling down her cheeks. You don't understand. I didn't mean for this to happen. I let out a humorless laugh. You didn't mean to steal? To lie? To ruin my life? I took a step closer, my eyes narrowing. Then what exactly was your plan, Lauren? She shot up from her seat, pointing a trembling finger at me. This is your fault. I arched an eyebrow. My fault? If you had just left when I told you to. If you hadn't always been in the way, none of this would have happened. She was hysterical now, her breath coming in uneven gasps, her face blotchy and red. You think you're some kind of saint? You're nothing. You've always been nothing. The room fell into stunned silence. For the first time in my life, I saw it. The desperation, the bitterness, the raw, unfiltered hatred she had been hiding behind every fake smile, every backhanded comment. And I realized something. She didn't hate me because I was weak. She hated me because she couldn't control me. Dad stood up abruptly, pushing the documents away from him like they burned. We have to go, he said to Mom. Mom hesitated, looking between us. What about her? She asked, nodding toward Lauren. Dad's voice was cold. She's not our problem anymore. For the first time in my life, they turned their backs on her. Lauren stood frozen, her mouth slightly open as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Then she turned to me, hatred burning in her eyes. Are you happy now? She spat. I smiled, ecstatic. She let out a scream of frustration, grabbing the glass of wine she had set down and throwing it against the wall. The deep red liquid splattered across the white paint, dripping down in thick, jagged streaks. No one flinched. No one rushed to comfort her. For once, she was alone. Mike let out a breath beside me, shaking his head. This is over, Lauren, he said quietly. You've burned every bridge. She turned on him next, her voice shaking. You can't just leave me. You promised. Mike looked at her with something that almost resembled pity. Almost. You did this to yourself. Lauren's shoulders heaved as she looked around the room, as if trying to find an ally. But for the first time in her life, there was no one left to defend her. Mom and Dad were already heading for the door. Mike was done, and I had never felt freer. What do you think? Did Lauren deserve everything that happened to her? Or should she have faced even worse consequences? Comment 111 if you think she got exactly what she deserved, or if you have another idea for how she should have paid for her actions. Let me know in the comments. Because as far as I was concerned, she had finally reaped what she had sown. 1 year later, the sun streamed through the large windows of my apartment, bathing the room in a golden glow. It was quiet, except for the faint hum of city life outside. No more screaming matches, no more guilt trips, no more walking on eggshells. I was free. I sat on my small balcony, a steaming cup of coffee warming my hands, staring out at the world below. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh bread from the bakery down the street. It was a far cry from the suffocating environment I had once lived in, a house where love was conditional, where I was tolerated rather than accepted. But that was the past. I had spent the last year rebuilding myself from the ground up, At first, it was strange not having to defend my every move. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to pull me back into the chaos. But the longer I stayed away, the more I realized something. I was finally in control of my life. I had found a new job, a place of my own, and for the first time, I surrounded myself with people who actually cared about me. People who saw me, not as a burden, not as someone to control, but as a person worthy of love and respect. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. I picked it up expecting just another notification, but then I saw the name on the screen. Mike. I hesitated for only a moment before opening the message. Hey, just wanted to say thanks again. Hope you're doing well. I smiled, a genuine, unforced smile, the kind I hadn't worn in years. Mike had divorced Lauren. Last I heard, she had been couch surfing, burning through the last of her connections. My parents? They had washed their hands of her completely, and in some twisted way, I knew that was the worst punishment she could have received. She had spent her whole life making sure I was the outcast. But in the end, she was the one who ended up alone. I typed a quick response. Doing great. Hope you are too. As I set my phone down, I took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't bracing for the next betrayal. I wasn't waiting for someone to tear me down. I was finally living my life on my own terms, and it felt damn good. If there's one thing this experience has taught me, it's that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by love, respect, and mutual support. Just because someone is related to you doesn't mean they have the right to manipulate, control, or mistreat you. And sometimes, walking away isn't just the best option. It's the only option. I also learned that justice has a way of finding people like Lauren. She spent her entire life playing games, manipulating everyone around her, and using people for her own benefit. But in the end, she lost everything. Not because of what I did, but because of what she did to herself. And for those of you who have ever felt like the outsider in your own family, or who have had to cut ties with toxic people, you are not alone. You don't owe your loyalty to people who don't respect you. You deserve to be surrounded by people who genuinely care about you. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been betrayed by someone close to you? Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member or friend? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one, and I know there are others here who can relate to what you've been through. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to AGS Stories for more real-life stories of betrayal, resilience, and justice. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's moving on, living well, and never looking back.